Hey, so I have a tip that will help you to simplify complex subject matter in your tattooing. If you don't know me, my name is Jake Meeks. I've been tattooing since 1996, and in 2013, I started this Fireside tattoo network along with some friends of mine with the intent to help tattooers become better problem solvers, draw better pictures, make better tattoos. So the idea for this episode came to me a little while back when I had a consultation, and the subject matter was something that was seemingly pretty straightforward, but actually has a lot of complexity. So let's jump over and I'm going to show you the design that prompted this episode, and then I'm going to go through a few examples to try to help you best understand how I would go about solving the problem. Okay, so this was the design idea. Basically an eagle wing with an American flag kind of centered in it. It was going to go on the entire inside of the bicep from the armpit down about to the elbow in black and gray. Really, there was no drawing involved. It's all just basically clip art. I found an eagle wing on Pinterest probably, and then I found an American flag, and I just used overlay layers to make the two. And this is kind of what we came up with. And the reason that I say that it seems fairly straightforward, but it's really complex, is because of all of the patterns and textures. So we have not only the shape of the wings, but also the texture within the wings, within each feather. And then additionally, we have the patterns of both the wings and the flag. So our tendency as tattooers, once we get into a design, is to start noodling and rendering everything. And in a design like this, more often than not, you're going to end up with just chaos. You're going to end up with so much attention being paid to every little element within this design that you'll end up losing the whole. And so the way to deal with problems like this so that you don't end up with this chaotic tattoo with tons of little bitsy things happening just all through it, is to assign value ranges to particular areas. So inside of particular shapes of the tattoo, limiting the range of value just within that shape. Now this is pretty common in, say for example, landscape painting. This is a digital painting that I did for the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club when we were doing an exercise on perspective. And essentially what we've done here is we are limiting our value ranges where, in this case, in my example, the foreground is a silhouette of my darkest shape, right? The midground uses the greatest value range, so I have my lightest lights and some pretty dark darks between here and here. And then the background, back here, squeezes the value range where I don't have these light lights and I don't have these dark darks. So I have kind of a medium tones all back here. I have just dark tones here. And then I have my fullest value range where I'm trying to drive the most attention here in the center. And really the greatest contrast comes from the foreground to the midground area right here, so that I'm able to really drive attention into this area. And so this assigning value ranges to particular areas works really well in landscape painting or in a lot of different types of painting when you're trying to use atmospheric perspective to give the illusion that something is receding into the distance. But you can take these same concepts and you can apply them in a completely different way to serve a similar purpose in more illustrative or graphic sort of design. So instead of trying to give the illusion of depth, we're just assigning value ranges so that we have a clear hierarchy of shapes. So let me show you an example here. So this is an old sketch of mine that I found in a sketchbook, and I thought it would be a good example of what I am talking about here. So let's just say, I don't really know exactly what to look at in this composition. The octopus is grabbing my attention, but I have a lot of similar values throughout. So let's just say that what I wanted to do is drive attention to the octopus. So what I may do is grab the entire shape of the woman's head and just say it is a medium value. Nothing is going to go past, say, like a medium gray wash anywhere in the woman's body or head. So what I'm doing here is I'm restricting the amount of light that reaches this area. And now within that, I can go darker if I want. And so now I've just separated my main shape, the octopus, from my secondary shape, the woman's head. And so just by doing that, I've focused more attention on the octopus. Now I could go in and do the same thing in the octopus and start to break down shapes within it. So I could say that the lightest light is going to be up here, and I could just grab everything within the face of the octopus, as these eyes are all recessed. Sorry, I'm doing this kind of quickly. So now we could say nothing inside of that shape is going to be as light as anything outside of it. So we're just chunking out these big shadow shapes. Okay, so within that, I can come through and say, all right, the edges of all of these shapes are going to be silhouetted and they'll fall out into lighter tones. So all I'm doing is I'm thinking about separating dark and light shapes. I'm not really rendering anything. I'm just thinking about flat shapes and assigning a value range within a flat shape. So here, I could do that, and then as it goes and meets my lady head here in the background, I could let it fall out and become a lighter shape again so that it becomes a silhouette against that. So I'm just assigning value ranges to particular areas. All right, let me show you an example here of how this can be helpful in more complex types of designs. So I want to focus on the top of this. This is the tattoo that is in progress, obviously. Everything up here is healed and settled, and everything down here is fresh. So I want to go to the healed and settled area here. I want to zoom in on this and kind of illustrate the point. Okay, so all of my lightest tones are in this area, right? Everything, grab another color, everything that is in this area is assigned a darker value. Everything that's in this area is designed a medium value. This area is more of this. This area is more of this. And everything back here that's close to the head of the bird is assigned a darker value. And it only gets lighter as it gets away from the bird. Over here probably is as light as this over here. So even though there's a lot happening with textures and patterns here, I can group these shapes and just assign value ranges to particular shapes so that I can point attention where I want it to go. Whereas if you could imagine this same light being introduced in here and up here and back here and back here, it would turn into complete chaos. We need to reserve the values. We need to make sure that we're scrunching the values in one area so that we can highlight another area, and so that we can just simplify the design as a whole. Let me show you one that's a color example. So this is a piece that I was probably getting close to being finished with. It was an in-progress piece, but I want to focus in on these roses down here. So if you look at this rose, the one that is on the right side of my client's back, you'll see that it all is scrunched in a medium to dark value range. There's no real lights. There are no tones in this rose that are competing with these tones, right? And for the most part, in this entire area, there are no tones that are competing with these tones. I was purposeful about where I introduced them. And then as they move up, those light tones become a larger kind of piece of the puzzle. But if you zoom in down here, let me turn this layer off. If you zoom in down here, you can see that I have these unfinished pieces of these flowers. See, these roses still have skin tone, and that skin tone is distracting. That skin tone, because I didn't assign a value range to these roses the same way that I did this rose. These roses have a wider value range because they have these dark darks right here, and they have these light lights right here beside them. And so we have this really strong contrast in an area that it's really not useful or necessary, and it's more of a distraction than anything. So as I zoom out, you can see that that little edge of that rose and the edge of the rose that's over here on this side, both of those tend to grab attention unnecessarily because I didn't limit the value range within those roses. So if I were to go through here, for example, and just grab, let's just grab a nearby color. Let's just paint that in, and we'll just knock that back so that it sits in that medium value range. We'll do the same over here with this one. Just scoot them back where they sit all in that medium value range. Now I've limited the value range in these the same that I did in the first rows. Let me just turn this on and off. You can see the difference. So assigning value ranges to particular areas helps to simplify the design and make it more cohesive and make it a lot easier for you to drive attention to the areas that you want. I'm going to show you one other one here, and this one is more successful, I believe. This is just going to be a close-up of another tattoo that I've done recently in the last few years. And you notice if you squint down, the only areas that really catch your attention, or that catch my attention, are these areas of skin tone. These are the open sort of areas that my eye wants to go to, right? Everything else, all of this stuff, is assigned a medium sort of value range. So I can further show this example by dropping the saturation out. So now you notice everything in the body and scales of the mermaid, everything in the leaves and the seaweed, all are on the darker side of the value range. They're all from, say, 6 to 10, 5 to 10. Whereas my arm and my chest and my skin tone up here is probably from a, say, 5 to 1 value range. So the midtones may be the same, but this goes up to 1 and this goes down to 10. Now, just as an example, if I were not limiting the value range, if I weren't consciously limiting the value range in these areas so that I could highlight the skin tone in the arm, I might go down here and grab some of these tones and start to kind of paint in little highlights, because I'll think, oh man, I really want people to see these cool little scales. So I want to grab highlights all along these scales, and then, oh, I really like this shape right here, so I'm going to do a strong highlight along the edge of this guy, and like, oh, people should really be paying attention to these cool little petals and the seaweeds. I'm going to make sure that I grab some highlights on those as well. Now suddenly I've got this entire area competing with this area. But by knowing that I was going to limit the value ranges within these lower areas, I was going to limit the value ranges within the body and the scales of the mermaid. I was going to limit the value ranges within the seaweed, and I was going to push the value ranges stronger in the skin tone. By separating those shapes, by separating those elements, I was able to drive people to the area of the tattoo that I wanted them to pay attention to. And I was still able to use a lot of detail in these more reserved areas. So just because I limited the value ranges and didn't use a lot of strong highlights doesn't mean that I can't put a lot of detail in these darker shadow shapes. I'm going to show you another example here. Now, this is an in-progress piece, but this is a great example of how hard this is to actually do, because this is a tattoo that I'm working on. I'm talking about limiting value ranges, but I haven't done it in this piece. I've allowed myself to get really noodly, and I have all these skin tones that are popping through all over the place. So if I drop this to grayscale, you can see I have lights all over the place. I have full value ranges everywhere. So if this fire of the belly is what I'm hoping to focus attention on, it's going to be my lightest, brightest tone, I need to make sure that everything in the shapes surrounding it are darker. So I need to squeeze my value ranges in everything up here. I need to squeeze my value ranges in everything down here, and I need to only stay in my light value ranges right here. So light set of shapes, dark set of shapes, medium set of shapes. So I need to go ahead and assign those from a value standpoint. And I haven't done that yet, but let's go through and let's just add a multiply layer and let's just paint over all of these. And you can see already right there that just by going through and darkening that entire shape without regard to the detail within the shape, just by darkening the entire shape, I'm able to focus attention in this center area where I wanted to. And now, like I said before on the mermaid piece, just because it's darker shapes doesn't mean that I can't use detail in those dark shapes. So now I can go through and I can grab, maybe I could grab some of this lighter, brighter orange right there, and I could paint that in a little brighter right here, because it's still in this darker sort of family. Maybe I can get away with doing it here as well. Wherever I want. I can come through and I can grab these different tones that are already within this shape, and I can paint detail in around it. I just need to make sure that that detail stays within the assigned value range. So if I were to go down and grab this and start painting, now I've broken the rules and I'm introducing these values in an area that are forcing them to compete with another area. So if you have tattoos that are in progress, I would recommend doing this exact exercise. Photograph them, go in and block in a big kind of multiply layer over them just to darken an entire shape, and then just start to tease detail back out. But make sure that you're purposefully assigning value ranges to certain shapes to fit within the hierarchy of what you want people to see, to make sure that the major shapes, the big shapes, are clear and easily readable. And what you might find is once you've done that, you might be able to grab a tone like this and start to sneak it in an area or two. So maybe this glow can catch just the bottom of this leg, and maybe it can just catch just right in some of these areas to kind of show a little bit of a reflected light. You may find that you can get away with that, but that's further in the process. What you need to do first is clearly separate this shape from this shape. Now let's go back to one final black and gray example. And I'm going to show you that it takes a little bit of trusting the process to pull this off. So here is a close-up of a back piece that I did several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and this is our first pass on it. I had done some wash lines through here, but you can see that what I had done is I had just decided that the majority of the face was going to be in shadow, and I was purposeful about where my lights were going to be. So I was going to have lights here, and then mainly just right through here, and not much else. So all of this stuff is in kind of a medium shadow tone. But the problem is whenever you're tattooing it, it looks like this. It's irritated, it's angry, and it looks like a muddled mess. That's why it's so important to make sure that you're assigning the value ranges based on what you know your wash setup to be. So if you use a 10-drop gray and a 5-drop gray and a 3-drop gray, or if you use pre-mixed gray washes, make sure that you know that everything in this section is a medium and dark gray wash. Everything in this section is a light to medium gray wash, and you're separating them by section so that you can trust what the healed results are going to be. So here is a shot of how that tattoo settled in. This is probably several months later. I'm still working obviously on the bottom of the back. So the back piece was still in progress, but this is probably a few months settled. And you can see that there's nothing dark in here. Everything is assigned within a value range. So all of this stuff is a medium to light value range. Everything in here might be a medium to dark value range with just little pops of white. And then, this stuff right here is my skin tone. And I was just purposeful about knowing and trusting what those gray washes were going to look like when they settled in and healed. So what we might do when executing this first one is just making sure that we're simplifying and assigning a value range regardless of the pattern within the individual feathers. We might just say everything in here is going to be from a 4 to 7 in a value range. Everything in here is going to be an 8 to 10. Everything in here is going to be an 8 to 10. Everything in here is going to be a 3 to 5, right? Everything in here is also going to be a 3 to 5 or a 2 to 5. And then once we've chunked these big shapes out, then we can say, all right, if this area is a 2 to a 5, then this is the 5 and this is the 2. 5, 3, 2, 3, 4, right? We can just start to assign these little values throughout. And then we have little ink caps that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 10, whatever our values are. So I know anytime that I'm working on the shapes of the stripes in the flag, I'm working somewhere in this range. I'm dipping only in these 2 cups to make this happen. And whenever I'm working on this part, I'm only working in this range. I'm only dipping in these 2 cups to make this happen. And I think another good idea, even for small tattoos, while you're kind of getting a feel for assigning value ranges to particular areas, is to do everything in 2 sessions. Even if you have to give the second session away, it's well worth it for your own education and to keep your tattoos from becoming chaotic messes where everything's competing for attention. So even if you did this tattoo, the stars and stripes and the eagle wing, even if you did that in 2 or 3 sessions and you said, okay, in the dark part of the stripes, I'm only going to do a 4, even though it's bending and I know some of it's a 5 and some of it's a 4 and some of it may even be a 3, I'm just going to make it a flat 4. And everything in the light stripes, I'm just going to make a flat 2. And everything in those darker areas of feather, I'm just going to make an 8. I'm just going to make just use dark gray wash on that only, and then let it heal and come back and layer over it. Just laying that base layer down has already assigned the lowest end of that value range for you, so you don't really have an option to push it lighter because you've already made it a medium gray, a 4. So a 2 and a 1 is not available to you anymore. I think that's a great way to learn. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for spending a little time with us. If you have any thoughts on this subject matter, feel free to leave them below. And, take her easy. Thanks for supporting what we do. See you next time.